Yeah. As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'm on roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains, haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHH-LP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Hello there.
Dr. Mckinney. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to you.
Good afternoon and good evening to you as well. I guess it's evening someplace, maybe in England.
Well, I say that because you and I are semi-historians, or we like to muse.
I'm an amateur historian. You're a more professional historian.
Well, I'll accept that since this is my show. But you have your fame and your reason for people knowing about you. You are a history maker. But getting back to the point, as we know, our brothers in Australia, it's tomorrow in terms of our brothers in Australia.
Tell me, inform me. What do you mean, our brothers in Australia? What's happening in Australia?
In Australia, it's tomorrow as we speak.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's right. You're talking about we're back to time.
Well, I mean, I don't think. In some ways, it's difficult to escape time. On the other hand, we've been trying to escape time by going to the moon and other things. So we're even reinventing time. I mean, just think about before Christ and after Christ. How did that mandate kind of get imposed upon people?
Yeah, absolutely.
Not to mention the Jewish calendar and the Aztec calendar. But yeah, our brothers in Australia, it's tomorrow. So I like to kind of remind people that we're sharing. It's time is an invention, and certainly Einstein has a lot to say about that in terms of relativity and time. So it's a fascinating topic. But let's jump in, and I'm glad you could spend some time with us. But by the way, as an aside, Deepak Chopra has a lot to say about time and age and aging, and even how you experience this concept. So it's worth kind of delving into. Did you see the title of the show today? I'm not sure if you saw.
I did. Very interesting.
You saw. Well, I hope you find it relevant to respond to. And even before if I could throw a spontaneous curveball at you, even before we talk about the state of the Black world, et cetera, you may have seen that I've just sent out the information about this concept of evil. Yeah. And let me impose upon you to kind of guess riff for a few minutes on what does evil mean to you, because it has been on my consciousness. And even if you talk about the state of anything, state of harmony, state of music, state of the world, state of the Black world, evil kind of might be one of the ingredients that's impacting that definition. So I was just, is it fair for me to kind of throw you that curveball or that fork ball and have you share a few thoughts about what evil means to you?
Well, Tom, it wouldn't be your show if I didn't get a curveball every now and then. So, it's interesting that you brought that up, because I've been doing a lot of thinking on that topic as well. And I think I may have mentioned to you privately that I'm working on a book right now that loosely is titled Rasta Economics, or, the Economics of Babylon. And, so that led me to some research about, we typically, at least Rastafarians and others, when you mention Babylon, we think of, well, that was an evil empire back in the, early history of man's civilization on this planet. And so I actually went back and started reading and looking at the history of Babylon. And I remembered I traveled to Germany about a decade ago, and there's a museum in Berlin that features Babylonian civilization. And it's really fascinating. I mean, their civilization was not as old as the Egyptian civilization, but it was old. But we kind of like think of them as an evil place, that but if you read the history and even the biblical interpretation of Babylon, they really weren't that much different from anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they were actually very creative. This was the civilization. Man has developed civilizations around rivers.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the Babylonian civilization was, over in between the Euphrates and the Tigris, the Egyptian civilization, obviously on the Nile, the West African civilization on the Niger River.
Mm-hmm.
And so river culture is really important. But, I think it's probably wrong to attribute evil to a sort of paint evil with a broad brush. I think, I kind of look at it as a part of a human trait. It's the yin and the yang. We all have the capability of doing evil things.
Mm.
And I think the challenge of humanity is, how do you counteract those evil impulses?
Mm-hmm.
And then, their society has a role to play, because society can put pressure on people to move in towards the evilness or away from it. And you as a human have to develop the defenses and the strength to resist those temptations. And so it has the capability. Evil is contagious. And so you saw that. I think as the most recent example of the contagion of evil was on January 6th. You had, Trump talked about, well, you got good people. When the Charlottesville thing happened, he talked about good people on both sides. And, we kind of reacted in a way that I think was appropriate. No, those Nazis are by definition not good people.
Mm-hmm.
I think they are, those acts are evil. What the Nazis did was evil. What the slavers did was evil. What the plantation owners did was evil. So those are acts, and you get society involved because they try to justify those evil acts because there's benefit to essentially the political class that is responsible for essentially making the rules.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite reggae songs is by Steel Pulse. They say, "Babylon makes the rules where my people suffer." Okay, so again, that's the domination of evil. So, we, I think, are and this is where I think it ties into the topic that you wanted to talk about today, is that we as Black people, as Africans, have to establish our sense of righteousness. That sense of righteousness comes from, what the lessons of our ancestors taught us, and not from the lessons of the rich and powerful.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to in this country, and not just Black folks, but all folks, we tend to look to the rich and powerful for moral guidance, for what is evil and what is good. And we tend to wrongly associate wealth and power and money with good and cleanliness. And nothing could be further from the truth. Okay. And we tend to look at poverty and poor people as evil or suffering from the results, the consequences of their own evil behavior. Okay, so if you are rich, you're great, you're fine. If you're poor, well, you did something evil that put you in that condition. Now, I do believe that there are some karmatic laws in the universe that are at play, but they don't happen when we want them to happen. but they eventually happen.
Mm.
And so we have to I think rethink how we look towards the model behavior
Mm-hmm.
and to stay away from evil.
Mm.
Now you have, historically you have religion, and to a lesser degree philosophy, that people sort of rely on to give them the rules of the game,
Mm-hmm.
so that they can, kind of protect themselves from evil. And all civilizations have had those things. And again, in your study and my study, I know we've talked about the Mayat, the 42 laws that are associated with sort of ancient Egyptian uh, philosophy and religion. And, those are African philosophical rules that, quite frankly, Moses took a lot of them when he came up with the Ten Commandments.
Mm-hmm.
So Moses, as you know, was where did he come from? He came from Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And who was he married to? He was married to a Cushite, a black woman. And what were the philosophical practices of the Egyptians at the time of Moses? Well, the 42 laws of Mayat were part of that tradition, and those things were like, not what you shall not do, like in the Ten Commandments, but what they call the negative confessions
Mm-hmm.
of 42 Mayat laws. And basically, if you look at those things, for most of them now, there's some time specific things that might be a little anachronistic right now, but they are pretty good. They're pretty good guides to behavior.
For sure.
You don't take food away from poor people. You don't take things away. You haven't stolen from your neighbor. You haven't lied.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't killed anybody. So all of these things were written by Africans long before Moses came along and gave them to the Jews and became sort of the Judeo-Christian moral guide. So we've always had rules and methods. And my personal belief these days is to rely on our ancestors' religious philosophies as opposed to the religious philosophies of somebody else.
You know what? And I'm told that the governor of Louisiana is going to now amend. He's going to put in the other 32 because he's talked about the 10, but I'm told that he's been educated that he's going to post the other 32 as well. Just wanted to share that with you.
Well, I mean that, I think that the founders didn't get a lot of things, got a lot of things wrong, but one of the things they may have gotten right was that they realized the toxicity of religion when it comes to government.
Indeed. Apparently the Louisiana legislature and also the Supreme Court is kind of had a different opinion about that. Let's jump to your book. Tease people a little bit because we are going to have a follow-up show on your book and kind of sketch the outline. Don't give people the ending, but just let them know it's consistent with what you've kind of indicated already.
Sure. I mean, it's a work in progress, and so I'm trying to get this thing done by early fall. But I start out by essentially telling the reader who I am, and I think that's important to the reader understand how I kind of arrived at this. And so in life, everything is important. Everything that you've done in the past, brings you to where you are today. And and if you're paying attention, you learn from all those things that you experienced in your life. And so and everybody is unique, and because everybody's story is unique and has value. So nobody has my story, nobody has your story, nobody has the story of the next person that you meet on the street. They all are different. They all bring things, and so so what I'm doing in the early part of the book is telling my story.
Good.
And the uniqueness of that story, is that, again, it's not unique that it's unique. Everybody has a unique story, but the uniqueness of my story is essentially I'm the grandson of sharecroppers in the Arkansas Mississippi Delta, who has a Yale PhD somewhere along the line and worked in the White House. Okay, so those things don't usually go together, and I think that those things allow you to kind of see things in ways that might not be the same as others, either others that had a background in the Mississippi Delta or others who have a PhD in economics from Yale. The combination of those things is what's unique. And so the combination of those things is what I'm using from my background, from my history, from my learnings, from my constant study to say, okay, well, what are we dealing with in society in terms of our economic structures?
Yes.
And so I'm really trying to get to the core of this economic structure that we're all living in. And we are often so deep into it that we don't step back and say, well, why do we do that? Or why do we have to do it this way? Are there alternative ways of looking at how society is structured? And is there insight into how we can improve the lives of those who are literally stuck in conditions that they had no choice in? I mean, you're born. You didn't choose your parents. At least most people think that that's not the way it works.
Right.
And so we all have those sort of that random, chaotic, unexplainable origin story. But because some people right now suffer in the world, and it's not just here in this country, it is a global phenomenon. I think it's increasingly important for us as Black people to begin to do our own analysis of the situation, or as the Rasta say, the situation, because that's going to be perhaps the way out, not just for us, but for humanity in general. And so the book, I'm looking at what is the basis, what is the theoretical, the philosophical basis, essentially, for modern mixed capitalism. And we again, as I said, we didn't individually make the system; we're part of it, and that system has evolved. And economists take, we study the system. That's what a lot of what economists do, and we make predictions based on that analysis of the system, and we work in the system to, in some cases, try to improve it, in some cases try to make it worse. And so I'm trying to give my perspective of how this system has evolved to create the mess that we're in today.
Indeed.
And I firmly believe that I'm not saying the end is near, but we are in a mess. And in a mess that quite frankly humanity has not experienced before. So you can go down the list of things. So you've got multiple countries in the world that now have the capability, we're not talking theoretical, the capability of destroying whole cities, metropolitan areas with the push of a button. It's not just the United States and Russia anymore.
Right.
And so we've got, that is a power that has not existed before.
That's right.
We also are experiencing the effects of the abuse of our planet, our home. And we're abusing the system is facilitating that abuse in the pursuit of profits.
Yes.
And, our use of fossil fuels, our destruction of animal and plant life,
Mm-hmm.
our lack of respect for the quality of air and water.
That's right.
So all of those things are playing out in today's world. You look at places like the Sudan, and yes, they've had conflicts in Africa, and they will have they have conflicts all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of these conflicts are being driven by environmental factors, and those environmental factors in this case are driven by man. Now we
That's
don't
right.
know. We don't know what happened 10,000 years ago in Africa that turned the Sahara from a green garden like place
That's
with
right.
pre-Cairo, pre-Egyptian civilization. Essentially, the first civilization of humankind started there, probably. And as the Sahara expanded, those people moved north, they moved east, they moved west, they moved south, and some of them settled in what's now, what we call the Egypt and
Mm-hmm.
Kush and Kemet and Ethiopia, and some of them settled in Mali and in places like that, and some of them settled in the Central African countries today. But that was climate change, 10,000 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and it was devastating. And the climate change that we're seeing today is equally devastating.
Yes.
And the people that are feeling the worst of it, the most of it, are the people who have probably gained the least from the capitalist system that we're living in.
Mm-hmm.
Most of these people are at the bottom of human existence from a material perspective, but they're experiencing the worst conditions. And it's not just in Africa. You can look at the problems that people are having, in South and Central America with climate, the effects of climate change,
Mm-hmm.
and they're coming to the United States.
Yes. 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 And Dr. Fred, I want you to share that, because I want people to know that the book and I'll use the term research is not just you're stuck in the library researching things, but you've been on the road also interacting with people and discussing these thoughts. And my mind goes to, you were in Canada recently, correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. The Caribbean, maybe 4 or 5, maybe 8 or so weeks ago. You're on your way to DC, I believe, in early July. Weave in what in terms of this, you're writing in your mind as you interact with people. Weave in a little bit what you've been encountering in this regard.
Exactly. Thank you for that, because I'll start with the most recent trip to Montreal, where I was invited to be on a panel. And my part of my background has been in the area of supplier diversity and the development of diverse businesses and with corporate companies, corporate buyers. And this was an interesting conference that was put on by several diversity organizations based in Canada. And they asked me to come up and talk about what the hell is going on in the United States. Because if you're a Canadian and you're looking south, and they look more to what's going on in the United States than the US, that Americans do, looking up to Canada to see what's going on up there. Most Americans in probably public schools in most urban communities around this country couldn't point on a map where Omaha is, let alone where Montreal is,
or Ottawa, right?
Ottawa. Right. And that's again a system failing. But what I talked about when I was in Montreal was essentially really these historic swings in American sort of beliefs and policies when it comes to Black people and other oppressed people. And so I made the case that we're going through something, in my view, that is similar, not the same, but similar to the backlash that was experienced after Reconstruction in America, that lasted from like 1871 to 1965, legally, almost 100 years almost. And so you didn't have that long of a, what's interesting is the period of Reconstruction was not that much shorter than the period of what you might call civil rights in this country. So I kind of talked about that history. This didn't come out of nowhere. There's always been, under sort of an undercurrent of reactionism, of racism, of colonialism, of white superiority. And when those things raise their heads, it has implications on everything. And so institutions that you assume would know better, if you look back at history, those same institutions participated in, quote, the evilness. And we talked about evil.
Yes.
The whole Dred Scott decision. Those decisions were made by respected Supreme Court justices that allowed evil to persist in our country. And what you have today on the Supreme Court are justices that are just as comfortable making evil decisions that will impact our people.
Absolutely. And it definitely, if you think of the abortion situation,
Yeah.
I posted this morning just briefly, just to remind people that slave owners still had to pay taxes. They had to pay taxes on us. Property is property.
Right.
Talk to me, Dr. Fred, and kind of maybe weave in this. I love the way of sharing with people the connection between the relevance of current history as well as past history. But my mind goes to, and you kind of reference this with the way even with the Moses story, the invisible hand, Adam Smith. We've had these metaphors to kind of construct reality.
Absolutely. And I talk about the invisible hand in what I've written already. And because what I want to do is talk about, okay, what is sort of the modern basis of economic philosophy that is dominant. I mean, it's almost religion-like. And the invisible hand is the story that is written about in Adam Smith's book called The Wealth of Nations. And that book, interestingly, was written in 1776, the year of the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence. And so Smith was a Scottish, an Englishman who was a philosopher who one of his jobs was going around England with the wealthy people's sons and teaching them about the way the world works. And so a lot of that book, which became the basis of modern economics, talks about how things work. And what Smith did was he came up with several metaphors in that book. And one was the invisible hand. And the notion here is that in a capitalist society, you don't have to have an overseer, manager, a king, or anybody directing what should be done in society. And so you don't need it. And the rationale was that if, and there are several ifs here in that sort of this, what we call classical economic theory, if you have property rights, and that's really important. You mentioned slaves as property. So property rights are critical. And so property rights essentially mean that, somebody owns it. Okay. And and what they didn't care, who it was or what it was, but somebody owned it.
Yes.
And somebody, and this is where you get into lots of problems philosophically and politically and all kinds of issues. Because so what is being owned here?
Mm-hmm.
That's property rights. I mean, if we know in a lot of native cultures, whether it's Aboriginal cultures in Australia, or Native American cultures in this country, or Aboriginal cultures in Canada, or African cultures, traditional African cultures, there was no concept of owning land.
Mm-hmm.
How can you own something that's going to be there after you're long gone?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
It was here before you came, and it's going to be here after you leave. You cannot own it. You can't even move it. You can't take it away. But Smith and the early economists said, no, anything can be property, including humans.
Mm.
And so humans became property, land became property. If water became property, air is even now, being looked at as property. So property rights were one of the main things. The other thing that there's several other ifs in sort of Smith's invisible hand is that you have markets. And so this whole concept of markets, it was something that Smith really studied. And he was writing at a time when society was evolving. This was at the early stages of the Industrial Revolution and the last dying breath of feudalism in Europe. And so, what Smith observed was that if you have markets that are working, where individual entrepreneurs, and this is where I think we get sort of lost in the translation, because we have this vision of Adam Smith's world, but Adam Smith's world is not what we are living in today.
Mm-hmm.
Adam Smith's world was about real, like, shopkeepers. Okay, we have shopkeepers today, and it's a good thing we have them. But we also have multi-billion-dollar global corporations,
right? From bodegas to Bezos. So
yeah, exactly. So that's not the same. Those didn't exist when Smith was writing about the invisible hand. But the invisible hand, in his view, related to these small shopkeepers who understandably are going to try to do things in their best interest. Okay? They're human. They want to take care of themselves. They want to take care of their families. They want to make sure there's bread on the table. They want to make sure they got clothes to wear. They want to make sure they've got a roof over their head. And to do that, they got to sell stuff. And so they sell stuff. So you don't have to tell them to do that. They'll work on their own. So this gets into, again, human behavior and assumptions about human behavior. So the assumptions about human behavior that Smith sort of developed, he didn't fully develop, and this took other economists and decades to do it. Although some of the early English philosophers were talking about this, they were talking about utilitarianism. So some of the philosophical thought in the 18th century, 19th century was, well, why do people do what they do? And so, what's the explanation for that? And so Smith and other utilitarians believe, well, people do things that they do because they're trying to be happy.
Yes. And
that's in our Constitution, right? The pursuit of happiness. That's from the utilitarians. That's from the Adam Smith folks. That was the goal of human society, that individuals want happiness and they want to avoid pain. And so that pursuit of happiness is what is driving essentially this system. And so because you have this pursuit of happiness, you don't have to tell people what to do. They're going to take care of themselves. And as a result, consumers are going to get bread, they're going to get wine, they're going to get housing, they're going to get all of the things that they need. But they realize there's a problem, though. In order to get those things, you got to sell something. Okay? Because nobody's giving you anything in this new world to Adam Smith. And so that meant that individuals had to make a decision. And their decision had to be, well, how am I going to get the money I need to buy the stuff that I want, because nobody's giving it to me. We got a similar problem today, right? Where, if you are unfortunately born in a household that has not had the opportunity of education and development, has not had certain other characteristics, then you're going to be hard pressed to be able to sell what? Your services.
Mm-hmm.
And so when capitalism came in, we started the wage system is part of that capitalist system. So most people cannot be entrepreneurs, cannot be shopkeepers. Either they don't have the skills, they don't have the experience, they don't have the interest. But the shopkeepers, they have a method of selling something other than their services directly.
Yes.
So the invisible hand basically says, as long as you got workers out there trying to get stuff, and you got shopkeepers out there trying to sell stuff, demand and supply, you're going to have a market that is going to produce stuff that does not require the intervention of government. That's laissez-faire. That's where that comes from. Mm-hmm. This invisible hand notion.
And again, 100 years later or so, you have Marx and Engels kind of offering up a counter positive to that story. I was really pleased that you allowed me to throw a curveball at you earlier. I want to throw a forkball that you may not have heard that term forkball anymore.
I know what a forkball is.
But today it's the slider. But I'm from Pittsburgh, and the Elroy Face was one of the in the '60s. One of that was known for the forkball, and I might even throw a spitball at you as well.
That's illegal.
Well, until you get caught. I mean, right. you have people in the Hall of Fame that got away with it for a number of years, and I kind of as an aside, it's always like I'm taking every opportunity these days to since it is a year of 24 to kind of lift up. Say hey in terms of his experience, but the forkball and curveball and slider and knuckleball, and not to mention Satchel had like 10 different names for his pitches. But the forkball and perhaps trick question pertains to getting back to the evil thing. I like to remind people, and this is definitely content for another show, that the Nazis and the Japanese almost won.
They did.
And the stories that would have emerged in terms of ethics and politics and morals and laws, that would have been a whole new deal. To be specific, you and I might not even have been born, because we were next on the list. I was born in 1949, and my parents might have been into the furnaces as well if the Nazis and Japanese had won. So this issue of evil seems to me, I always like to remind people that it's a deep issue, but particularly that if we hadn't launched the atomic bomb first, et cetera, that we may not even be here today discussing these philosophical issues. Any thoughts about that?
Absolutely. And I think what your point really brings up something else, and that is, we talked about it in the beginning, time and the perspective of time. And our time on this planet is really short. It's in the whole long history of human society, we're only here for a fraction of a second.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you look at time over much longer periods, not even years, not even decades, not even centuries, but millennials, you will see societies go through these swings where evil may dominate for hundreds of years. And is subsequently replaced with something more human, and then that gets that gets destroyed. And so we go through these ups and downs, these historical millennial-like cycles of good and evil. But if you are, this is a philosophical issue too. If you happen to be born in one of those long periods of good, then you benefit, or you might benefit, or if you are good. If you happen to be born and live your life in one of those long periods of evil, then you suffer. And the evil of the Nazis was relatively short. I mean, it was too long if you were there experiencing it.
Yeah, getting hot.
Yeah, but it was short from a historical perspective. And so even, and I kind of look at this as relevant because even, if you look at the whole situation in Gaza today with the Israelis, Israel is a young country, 1948. Almost in your lifetime. You were born a year after the formation of Israel. So, they haven't had a long history as a country in this form. And they're going through something, and it's I think that what they are doing to people is evil in Gaza. I think what the Hamas people did to those concert goers was evil. So you got to call it like it is. Evil's evil. And that's I think that's where for Black folks in particular, we have to slow down a little bit in picking sides. We got to do our own analysis. And I wrote something recently about Biden, and I want him to be the next president because I think Trump is evil fundamentally. But I think Biden makes mistakes and does things that quite frankly, are evil. I had written about in April. I had written a piece on Haiti, and in that piece I say that the United States, realizing that it doesn't want to be sending the Marines into Haiti, what they did was they wanted to outsource this service, in this case, to the Kenyans.
That's right.
And I wrote that in April. And what happened? The Kenyan president gets a state visit to Washington to celebrate this relationship with the United States. And I'm sure all this stuff was in the works before I was writing about in April. But he gets the state visit. I'm sure that was something he asked for because he felt it probably would benefit his political career in Kenya. He goes back to Kenya. The United States, as I understand, gave the Kenyans about $200 million to pay for this, because Kenyans can't afford to send troops to Haiti. And so they agreed to send those troops. They get to $200 million. And what do you read last week? There's the people are in the streets in Nairobi trying to overthrow this guy. And I said in my April article, it was a mistake of the Biden administration to engage in that kind of international intrigue. That it was no good going to come out of that. And, that's what we're seeing. So this is a story that's still in the making.
That's right. That's right. But let's jump back, because I really appreciate your being able to kind of go from century to century and decade to decade, millennia to millennia. I want to jump back, and certainly the Adam Smith and Invisible Hand, that was really helpful for people to be reminded about. To talk about the Magna Carta and the knights, and we don't even hear the word serfs anymore. Of course, it's been replaced by slaves. So I'm into these stories and metaphors that have just been with us, and that have just really, almost as you've indicated earlier, blinded us to the real truth.
Right. And so again, the Magna Carta, I believe, goes back to like the 13th century.
Indeed.
And what happens there again is Europe and England are going through a change. And if I can take the liberty of stepping back before the Magna Carta because these things are related.
Indeed.
And so you have to kind of look at what happened to the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire, lasted, again, these long periods of time, maybe 700, 800 years. But by around the 4th century, the Common Era, it was beginning to fall apart. And, why was it falling apart? Some of it was sort of, mismanagement, too much wealth concentration, bad behavior on the part of the rulers, disrespect for people. And what happens? The quote barbarians started attacking the Romans on the borders. What were those borders, and who were these barbarians? These barbarians were Germans for the most part, what were called Visigoths, and they were coming from the German region, from Scandinavia, from those areas into southern Europe, and attacking the Roman borders and eventually getting to Rome and overthrowing Rome. And they were called barbarians for a reason. They didn't have government. They didn't have cities or things like that. They lived like wild men and women, and they were barbarians to the Romans. Okay, they didn't wear togas and take baths and things like that. So when Rome was displaced, it left a void. And what was that void? That void was called the Dark Ages. And so from about the 4th century Common Era to about the 12th century, Europe was literally in the dark. Now, it's interesting. White historians don't like talking about it as the Dark Ages. They like referring to it as the early Middle Ages or the late Middle Ages. But the reality is these were the Dark Ages.
Yes. And
the term manhunt, that term was developed because the manhunt meant exactly what it said. They were hunting men to eat. And so this was a dark time in human history in Europe. Wasn't all over the world. There were thriving societies and cultures elsewhere around the world, and also in Africa at the time of the Dark Ages in Europe. But as Europe evolved out of these Dark Ages in the beginning of the Renaissance, you also had this feudalism that had developed.
Yes.
Feudalism developed because it was a protection racket. And so the people basically said, okay, we'll work your land, we'll give you our props, you just build a castle and protect us from the rest of those barbarians. And so a feudal system, essentially a gang system, developed, and that lasted for a long time. And then you had, sort of more liberal thinkers come around and say, you know what, this is not all that good for us if we want to grow this country or want to have a more balanced system. And so the Magna Carta came up, was kind of a human rights document. So it was an early human rights document, not as far-reaching as the French document about the rights of man or the Declaration of Independence. Those were revolutionary documents, but the Magna Carta was a document that had that capability. But again, the Magna Carta wasn't the first of those documents. There were other documents in ancient times and in even not so ancient times in Africa that covered the same issues. And Africa not all of Africa had a writing culture. They had a griot culture. They passed it down from generation to generation, which meant it wasn't that they forgot anything. They knew it, but they shared it that way. And a lot of that culture, that griot culture, had rights really firmly established.
Yes.
And and in fact, I've been reading some stuff about matrifocal societies in Africa. And the matrifocal societies essentially meant that the man had the power but the woman had the authority.
Mm, mm.
And at any time the man misused that power, all the woman had to do is say, "You're done, get out."
Mm.
And that was it.
Mm.
That was Africa. And so, if you're the king, if you're the ruler, the chief, and your mother's over here, basically she's your boss. And everybody in society knew that.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah.
And many tribes in North America also had that structure.
Right. That's traditional African, structure, a traditional society. There's a role for the man, a role for the woman. They didn't expect the woman to go out and kill buffaloes.
And so we have about 10 minutes. I want to kind of throw another spitter at you, because just as you were talking, and there's a lot of speculation, we'll never know about why, with the technology of the compass and the invasion of, or the entrepreneur that was funded by, Columbus. People forget that Columbus was funded.
Right.
I don't castigate him as much as the Queens and Isabella and other people. But if you think of the Dark Ages, and there's this theory about angst and trauma being passed on to generations, folks that lived in Europe in the 1600s, 1500s, 1700s, in terms of their angst and their trauma that they've experienced, when they find this new land, when they find the opportunity to expand, when they find this new gold, when they find sugar and just that they're, people talk about, were they really, so why were they so aggressive to kind of enslave people? They might have just been just expressing what the cave that they had been living in for so long, and this was a goal. This was a revelation opportunity.
Absolutely, it changed the world for them and for us and for the natives that they found here, and many of them they killed off with their diseases and just mass genocides. But yes, Columbus was an entrepreneur that was funded by Queen Isabella of Spain, and they essentially, the Spanish crown, and they weren't sold at first, and they weren't looking for America either. They were looking for, and this is where the history is also very interesting. The Ottoman Empire, which the Moors also are related to this. The Moors had come in and conquered Spain in the 8th century, and what's now also Portugal in the 8th century, and they ruled Spain and Portugal. These were Africans. They were Africans who believed in Islam, but they were Africans, North Africans. And there's a lot of that history there. One of the early African generals was a guy by the name of Tarif. And one of the first things he did when he conquered southern Spain is he implemented a tax on all goods and services coming out of his region. And that's where we get the word tariff from. Okay. The Rock of Gibraltar was named after a North African who had set up, a Black African who had set up shop at that critical location. And so the Spanish, by the 14th century, had begun to remove the Moors from Spain and Portugal. And now they were, beginning to feel their oats, but they still had a problem going through the Mediterranean, because the Ottoman Empire was dominant in that area. So they couldn't go that way. And so they had begun to explore, going south towards Africa and around Africa, but that was way too far. So, that was the theory. Maybe we go this way and we'll run into China, or we'll run into India.
Yes. But
they ran into America to the problem that created the part of the problem that we have now.
We have about 3 or 4 more minutes. Let's kind of wind down and take a deep breath. We really covered so much, and it's so helpful. This I'll just throw this out in terms of I often mention to people that we mentioned Babylon, that we had this story about the Tower of Babel, and I'm suggesting to folks, and you've kind of indicated this as well, that we're really into the Tower of Babel chaos part 50. So this might always be an underlying theme of communication, technology, storytelling, belief systems, structures, economic systems, etc. But in any kind of closing thoughts, lastly, I'll kind of tease you even more. When people talk about the economic system, I say until we have Mandela dollars, people can wear Mandela shirts, but until we have Mandela, so the fact that in America my dollar might buy 50 times more in another country, just that system seems to me to be really one of the linchpins of this economic disparity.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we didn't even get into the sort of all of the international ramifications of modern capitalism that's dominated by large corporations who control a lot of the political institutions that we see. And part of those institutions involve, international finance and money itself. And, what's the value of that money? What are the values that people have? Why are some countries poor, even though from a natural resource perspective, they're rich? And other countries are rich, even though from a natural resources perspective, they're poor. And so that's also some of the things that I'm going to get into my book is the role of money.
Excellent.
But I want to leave on. Can I leave with one short story?
It's your absolutely. We'll conclude on your story. Please share.
Okay. So we talked about Babylon and Babylon's system. In my research about the Babylonian system, I don't know, and I encourage people to read widely. I'm not a Christian, but I read the Bible occasionally for information, for insight. And if you read the Bible and it talks about Babylon, they also talk about Nimrod. And Nimrod was the great grandson of Noah, supposedly, and the grandson of the source of the African people, according to the Bible. And so Nimrod, therefore, was an African. And so that also made me kind of rethink, well, maybe we got a different perspective of Nimrod in the Bible because it was written by the non-Africans. And so I encourage people, I mean, I was never taught that when I was going to Sunday school.
That's right. That's right.
But people need to study it and ask their ministers about it.
Yes. Excellent. Dr. Fred, thank you so much. Safe journeys. I know you're down in DC, and for August, are you touching base on any continents or other countries in August, or taking it easy? Or?
Yeah, I'm probably going to go back to Jamaica before September.
Good.
So I'm looking to go back there, and we can talk about that as well. That's some interesting work that I'm doing down there.
Excellent. Thank you as always.
No, thank you.
Onward and upward.
Thank you, my friend.
All right.
Bye-bye.
As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains, haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHH LP